In discussing the Civil War and its impact on the city of Chester, there are frequently several key figures that spring to mind. The people that must be mentioned on the side of the Royalists include King Charles I, of course, Prince Rupert, Prince Maurice, Lord John Byron and Francis Gamble. These men had important roles in defending Chester from the parliamentarians, even though in the end they did not succeed, and demonstrated strategy and skill throughout their defence of Chester. The first person to talk about is King Charles I, who became king in 1625. He was the leader in charge throughout the Civil War, and had been battling disagreements with Parliament throughout his reign on matters such as religion, when he married a Roman Catholic woman, and failures as a leader regarding war after being defeated in other countries at the time. At the beginning of the Civil War, Charles had the north, the west, and the southwest of the country all in support of him, but this changed over the course of the war as many battles were fought and lost to the parliamentarians. This leads us to Charles's involvement in Chester. Charles led Royalist forces into Chester in September of 1645, in what has been named the final phase of the Siege of Chester. His forces took on parliamentarians in the Battle of Roan Moor, and further fighting at Hoole Heath was witnessed by Charles from the Phoenix Tower. For his own safety, he was then moved to the Cathedral Tower, and having seen all the failures that had been endured, he left the day after, calling for a surrender if any issues in the following week could not be fixed. Charles lost the war, and after another attempt at civil war in 1648, he was executed in January of 1649. Another key Royalist commander of the Civil War, who played an important part in the Siege of Chester, was Prince Rupert of the Rhine, Charles's nephew, who was originally from Prague, but ended up joining the Royalist forces after having a role in the fighting in the 30 Years' War. Rupert commanded armies at the Battle of Edge Hill, the Siege of York, and the Battle of Naseby. With regard to Chester, Prince Rupert visited from the 11th to the 13th of March in 1644 in support of the Royalists, and as an outcome of this, they decided to strengthen more defences against the parliamentarians. Rupert visited Chester a couple more times during the Siege of Chester, and on the last visit, he left, taking many troops with him. He eventually surrendered and left England, only to return years later, following the death of his brother. Prince Maurice can also be seen as an influential figure in Chester's part of the Civil War. Brother to Prince Rupert and nephew of King Charles I, he came from a military background, which began in his teenage years with the Dutch army and continued up to his involvement in the English Civil War. Although he played what is arguably a lesser role in the war due to the fact that he did not have as much authority to command compared to his brother, he still took part in many battles and sieges throughout the Civil War, such as those at Edge Hill, Brentford and Bristol. In relation to Chester, Maurice gathered troops from nearby villages and cities, such as Shrewsbury, and marched into the city, helping to hold off parliamentarian forces for as long as possible. In the end, he left Chester with his brother and many troops. Following on from the war, he sailed the Commonwealth with his brother, but died at sea in 1652. Lord John Byron was the nephew of Sir Nicholas Byron, who had been working with the Royalists in Chester before his capture in 1644. Byron replaced his uncle as governor of Chester after this to fight for the Royalist cause. He had much experience, having been involved in various battles in the Civil War, but was not seen as one who was listened to what he was told and was very reckless, leading to defeat by the enemy multiple times. Byron started to lose the support of the citizens of Chester, as well as many of the soldiers that had been on his side over the course of the fighting, due to military failings as well as issues with resources throughout the war. Eventually, Byron left Chester after surrendering in early 1646. The final figure that is important to mention is Francis Gamble, who had been an MP for Chester until 1644 when he lost his seat. Gamble was made a baronet in 1644 after being rejected for various positions, such as Mayor of Chester and Governor, a role he lost to Lord Byron. He stayed by King Charles's side while he was in Chester, and he was at the Phoenix Tower with him when they watched forces fighting, before Charles was then moved to the Cathedral Tower. After the Civil War, he was dismissed from Chester and fined. He was executed in 1654. In conclusion, the Royalist Command was made up of people who were very experienced, and despite some flaws, had individually seemed fit for the job. However, due to the fact that the parliamentarians had more money and resources and support overall, the Royalists were not exactly in a position to succeed right from the beginning. Ultimately, a lack of leadership skills also proved to be their downfall, as although they had the strategy and skill for battle, they were not capable of making the tough decisions that could have led to them winning Chester and the war had they made the correct choices. Despite this, the Royalists still stayed determined for the majority of the fighting in Chester, and managed to command their soldiers to undertake tasks which held off parliamentarians for as long as was possible, thus highlighting that, although they did fail in many areas, they still succeeded in others.